Perfectionist Musicians Podcast. Take action to find healthy perfectionism. Discussions about the background of successful careers in music performance, arts and science.
In this episode of the Perfectionist podcast with my guest Mark Bain, professional trumpet player, brass teacher and performance coach, we are talking about how to handle performance nerves and negative self-talk. This episode can be particularly interesting for you if you teach music for children and teenagers, since Mark shares his insights about dealing with the younger generation. For example, he likes to make his students to use their metacognitive skills. In case you are not familiar with the term, metacognition refers to thinking of one's thinking. In other words, metacognition happens when having a critical awareness of our own thinking and learning and ourselves as a thinker and learner. Therefore, metacognition has a crucial role in the processes of planning, monitoring and assessing our performance and its understanding, so it is quite important in teaching and learning. But getting back to my guest, coming from a musical family in Adelaide, South Australia, Mark became a professional trumpet player by earning music degrees in Australia and Germany. Before he would join the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra in 2011 as tutti trumpet, he worked with Orchestra Wellington, which is New Zealand's oldest professional regional orchestra, and beforehand he taught and freelanced as a performer throughout Europe and Australasia. Mark has a strong passion for music education, and thus he took on teaching positions in several music colleges in Australia, although he has insights into music examinations on the national level as well, since he serves as a brass examiner in Tasmania on the Australian Music Examinations Board. To share his experience he gained as an artist and teacher, Mark started a service titled Performance Under Pressure. As part of this initiation, Mark has been giving presentations, seminars and masterclasses at schools, universities and organizations around Australasia. As he recalled it, his coaching has helped many musicians around the country to dramatically improve their performances. Mark, thank you very much for accepting to be interviewed for this podcast. And after this introduction, I really would like to hear more details about you, what are your experiences as a trumpet player and a performance coach for musicians?
Sure, thank you for having me. So my experiences with performance anxiety, I think as a performer, most concerts I perform always have some sort of anxiety there, and so it's a normal part of performing for me. And throughout my career, I've had to work on that and improve on the psychology side of things, and so it's just a part of my routine now. And so that's sort of developed me into getting into performance coaching as well, and and just trying to help as many people as I possibly can along the way. I think as performers, you want to help people. As I'm a teacher as well, so I just want to help people and help them get the best out of themselves. So all of this sort of stuff comes into it as well. There's quite a few performers that don't really want to talk about fears and anxieties, but I'm the opposite. I like to talk lots about it. So.
Well, I was just thinking while you were talking that what were the exact problems? Probably you dare to talk about these issues, so what made you start doing this?
Yeah. I was studying quite a fair bit, and I went to Germany, and so I was studying overseas, and that was a pretty intense period for me. Being away from family, that put additional stress on me, and so going into auditions and into performances, I started to sort of put a lot more pressure on myself, realizing that, okay, I'm studying, I'm being more serious, I have to perform well. And so that additional pressure didn't really help. I think there was one audition where I completely fell apart, and I lasted probably 30 seconds and the panel cut me off and said, no, you're done. And so that was pretty demoralizing, but it was good in a way, because looking back at it, had I not had those not such positive experiences, then I wouldn't have had the opportunity to develop my the mental side of performing. So it was really something negative at the time turned into a positive, and I've just continued that throughout my career now. And I realised that it's not just about playing your instrument, it's also has to be about the mental side and how you think when you're performing and how different it is than in the practice room. So,
and how did you restart after that failure, if you can call it a failure?
I was pretty demoralised. I mean, yeah, of course, you perform. I was really well prepared. It wasn't a difficult audition in terms of the list, and and I was like, wow, what is going wrong? What? All of a sudden, like, I just fell apart, and so I was really searching for answers, and that's where I came about. My brother is also a fantastic and world famous musician, and he recommended that I read this book by Don Green called Performance Success, because I regularly talk to him about performing, and he suggested that, look into this and see if that's something that can help you. And it's very, very quickly turned things around. So, and it got my focus where it needed to be, as opposed to worrying about getting nervous or worrying what the panel might think, or all those sorts of additional thoughts that come into your mind. So that's how I kind of got into it, and that was, really helpful.
Just mentioning Don Green's book, the question occurred to me that what can you teach beyond musicians can learn?
I think self-help books are great because they give you a broader perspective of things, and they give you lots of tools to just implement, but then they're not customized, which is why it's great. I mean, it's like, I'm a trumpet player, so if I was going on YouTube and looking up trumpet videos, I can learn so much from so many world famous people just watching them play and hearing them what they say, but it's not customized to me. And so that's where getting a performance coach or talking to someone, and they can actually sort of pick out specific things that you can work on, rather than just giving you all of these things and go, here you go, work on all of it, as in self-help books. Actually talking to someone, and as well just talking to someone, really, by you actually speaking out loud about it, it makes it more real, and which is good, because then you can actually go, okay, this is a thing that I want to tackle and I want to improve on, and I'm telling someone else, so I'm making someone else accountable for me as well. So it's kind of like, giving your teacher or your coach or mentor some responsibility to keep you on track. And to do that, it's fantastic, because you know what it's like as well. It's like, if you know you've got a lesson coming up and your teacher said you have to prepare this by this lesson, you practice differently and you prepare completely differently. So
you mean that, is it focused, much more focused?
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just fluff, and you go, I might work on it. Yeah, sort of. But man, if you've got someone riding on your back saying, come on, you gotta improve on this. You really want this, so come on, you can do it, but keep on the path. And that really helps. And that's where I come in. So
okay. And what are the most common issues that musicians seek help with?
I like working with kids sort of in their teens, because quite often they think that what they're feeling on stage or what they're experiencing is weird and out of the ordinary, and because they don't know what's going on. They're learning about themselves, they're learning about their social connections, and all this stuff is going on. And that's where I feel a great privilege to be working with kids, is because you can actually guide them through that, and you can actually give them some tools and strategies to help them through it, but also make them realize that they're not freaks, that they're normal people, and they're feeling anxiety and nervous. It's like, and I always open up to my students and say, every time you see me perform, and I get a few students coming along to our concerts, but I say, every time you see me, I will be feeling nervous and anxious, and 100%. And I think by saying that, it really just breaks down their nervousness and anxiety, because they go, oh, okay, so if my teacher is feeling like this, I'm actually allowed to as well. So a lot of it is normalization, and just talking to the kids and getting them to express how they're feeling and what they're thinking. And then you can pick up on sort of patterns if having negative self-talk, then you can question them and say, okay, is that, if they're saying, oh, made a mistake, and they go saying swear words to themselves and berating themselves and saying, oh, I suck and it's terrible, you say, okay, is that really constructive? And so you can get them to think about how they're thinking and how they're going about what they're doing.
That's interesting that you have brought up this topic, because actually research distinguishes between two types of performance anxiety. One is negative cognitions, so that's the cognitive aspect of it, when negative thoughts occur during or prior to the performance. And these thoughts are usually about the performance or the consequences of a mistake. And the second type is the physiological or anxiety sensitivity aspect of the anxiety. So I would like to know that what is your experience? What have you noticed? Which one is more common among musicians?
I think it's a real combination of both of them. I think a lot of the time kids, they can go in and they start to feel their heart beating, like they start sweating, their hands go cold, all the classic symptoms of feeling nervous and anxious. And they start, like string players are notorious, you would know, Amesh, for shaking bow and things like that. And then they start to fixate on that, and then that becomes a negative thing, and then that negative reinforcement loop, and then it keeps going, and that it gets worse and worse. So, and then I think from that, then you can lose so much confidence, and then you get negative self-talk and things like that. So I think it's a real combination of two things.
Is it like a vicious circle?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's because so many kids, their fear is just right in front of their face. And so they're just so fearful, and all they can see is just fear. And that's all they can focus on. So they focus on their fear. They perform worse. And then they go, well, that was because of my fear. So then they feel even worse. They start to think even more negative thoughts, and it just gets worse and worse and spirals. Or they think that they should be calm on stage, and they're not. And they go, they're more anxious about trying to be calm than just accepting that anxiety is part of performing. So it's a real combination of the two. And that's where it's normalizing it is great, but also getting students to just talk it through and become more aware of what's going on, and more aware of, this is normal. You are going to have negative thoughts. That's part of being a human being. And you are going to have a higher heartbeat as part of performing, because it's just your anxious and stress reaction. So,
how do you help adult musicians or those who are already studying music at a high education level?
Yeah, definitely. The concepts are all exactly the same. I just use different language. I can, obviously, if I'm speaking to a teenager, I would speak to them in a different way than if I would be speaking to an adult or a professional. But the concepts are generally the same. And the thing is, with working with adults, you're probably working with sort of patterns that have already been there for a very long time. So they could have entrenched negative self-belief and low confidence and all that sort of stuff for years and years. Whereas with adolescent kids, they haven't had the chance to establish that quite so firmly yet. So with adults, it takes a bit more repetition and sort of going over the same things. And so it takes a little bit longer, in my experience, but the results can still be exactly the same. And having said that, I've worked with some adults, and they can make really quick changes just with a few little things, and that can actually snowball and get them to build confidence really quickly, just through a few little tweaks. But everyone's different. But yeah.
A number of researchers suggested that the reason musicians experience performance anxiety is because they would fear to receive negative criticism. What is your view on this? Because other issues can also cause anxiety, like perfectionism.
I think you're the expert on perfectionism, so I think that's totally a thing, particularly with classical musicians, that perfectionism is a big thing. But yeah, definitely fear of failure fear of criticism, I think, is linked to a fear of failure. With a lot of musicians, their association with failure and with criticism tends to be a negative one. Whereas if if criticism and failure and difficulty can be looked at in a positive way, like, okay, what am I learning from this? What experience am I gaining from this this perceived failure? What am I learning from this so that I can get better? So what skills do I need to improve on? What knowledge do I need to gain? What experience do I need more of so that I can improve? Rather than thinking, oh, I failed, and that affects me as a musician. I'm a bad musician because I failed. Or as a person as well, I'm a bad person because, I put all this time and effort into something and I failed. So definitely developing a more positive association with fear and with failure and criticism, I think is the first step. And that's, again, back to self-talk. It's like trying to talk to yourself in a kind and positive way, and not berating yourself. I mean, we're all human. We make mistakes. I've never performed a perfect concert in my life, and I probably never will. But every mistake I make, now I turn around and go, okay, why did I make that mistake? What was the reason behind it? What happened? What was the reason behind that mistake? And then how can I improve? What can I do to get better? I mean, that's classic Anders Ericsson sort of deliberate practice approach to it as well.
Not just physical practice, like practicing the piece itself or improving the technique, but mental practice, practicing mental skills as well, how to handle the situation, I guess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Actually, answering my question, what you said, it comes to me that fear of evaluation, in simple words, fear of criticism, is very external. I mean that its focus is outside the musician, so it can be that musicians' biggest enemies are themselves. And actually, what I learned from my own research, that everything happens mostly in your head, even if you fear criticism, and in fact, someone gives you negative feedback, and if you had fears about being criticized, you would interpret even the slightest negative feedback as a failure.
Yeah.
And the person who gave you that feedback could have given that with the kindest intention, but in your head it is exaggerated and interpreted that you have failed. So hence I thought that the harshest criticism happens in the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's just our anxiety response in general. It's all about perception. A performance is not a life-threatening situation, yet we have the same responses as if it were. So it's just about how we perceive things and perceive the people around us and all that sort of stuff. So absolutely, it's all, I mean, so much of it is in your head. And I think as well, like the classical music sort of school or the form of classical music really sort of pushes along the idea of perfectionism, because it is based around such refined technique. And, you have to be really a really high quality musician if you're an orchestral performer, for example. But that's, in some ways, it's really unhealthy because, we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. But as long as our focus is on making beautiful music and connecting with the audience, that is the more powerful connection that we can have with the audience, as opposed to, am I playing perfectly? Am I doing everything perfectly? So it's difficult because we do want to perform at a high level, but that's kind of unrealistic as well, in a sense of playing perfectly.
How do you work with adult musicians when you work with them? What do you do to achieve this?
I think the focus has to move away from aiming for perfection. It's aiming for excellence. I always say to my students, aim for excellence. We're not aiming for perfection because it's unattainable. So don't even try, but aim for the best, your best representation of who you are, the essence of who you are, and bring that through to the music. And it's not about performing like someone else would want to sound like. It's about performing about what you want it to sound like and exactly what you want to create. So, and I mean, that comes also back to like motivation. Like if you're producing something of your own, you're going to be more invested in it and you're going to be more motivated to do that. Whereas if you're always copying someone else, it's someone else's. You can't really take ownership of it. So a lot of my teaching and coaching I ask lots of questions. I try and be as metacognitive as I possibly can to try and draw the music out of the person, rather than me saying, here, play it this way and you win the job. It's like, no, I want to hear what you think. I want to hear what your voice is. And if they can do that, then it's going to be a much better version of themselves, and it's going to be far more convincing as well, because they're going to believe in what they're doing.
Is this working? Are they playing better because they discovered the best method, which is the most appropriate for their practice?
It's a longer process. I think it's very easy to teach or to coach people and say, do it this way, and they just copy it. I think that's a shorter process, but I think in terms of getting the best out of the student, I think it's a harder and longer process, but in the end they come up with a more authentic product and more in line with what they believe the music should sound like. Of course, there's guidance along the way, and I'll make suggestions and say, traditionally we wouldn't do this, or you might want to try these different ways, or so there's suggestions around that. But yeah, I think you get a much happier student if they're having more control over their learning. And
is it something to do with self-confidence?
I think it builds self-confidence, absolutely. I think it builds a lot better problem-solving skills, just because they have to think. Like, I get my students, I'll ask them a question and then I'll wait quite a long time sometimes. And sometimes it might be 20 seconds and they're thinking and thinking and thinking. I mean, that's a skill in itself. So, whereas if you give someone the answers the whole time, then they stop thinking. So I try and draw as much thought as I possibly can from my students and from my coaching, so that then you can become your own teacher, and that you can resolve your own problems, and that you know how to build yourself up and to work on yourself without me sitting there needing to, crack the whip and say, come on, do that again. It's like, well, you can self-analyze it a lot better and self-regulate a lot better as well.
We are heading towards the end of this session, and I would like you to leave a takeaway message for the listeners. So could you summarize it perhaps in one sentence? What is the best approach which is worth trying in order to be less anxious on stage and become a better performer?
I think there's a whole range of things, but I would just say be curious and just keep exploring. Like, it's there are so many different ways of approaching anxiety. I mean, you can work on basic things like just breathe and take big breaths to really reset your autonomic nervous system, and focus on what you actually want to create. And then if your focus is on that, focus on the music and what you want to create, then your focus is taken away from your fears and your anxieties. So it's about directing your focus onto what you want rather than what you don't want. And I think as well, like, if you can be really in depth with exactly how you want to play your instrument, how you want to sound, how you want it, every single note, if you have that really crystal clear and that is your focus, you've got no choice but to focus on that rather than thinking about, what does the audience think, or, oh, I'm shaking or anything like that. If that's really the point of contact, or the point of focus, then I think that's my goal as a coach as well, is to draw your focus into what's really important, the actual essence of the music. And if you can do that, I think you can make some amazing music and really, and stir people up in their hearts and in their minds as well in the process.
That sounds so inspiring. Mark Bain, trumpet player of the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra in Australia and music performance coach, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. But thank you for having me.
If you have problems with performance nerves and stage fright and you would like to start a discussion about it, you are welcome to talk about with us. Also, if you have questions or topic suggestions that you would like to be turned into an episode here at the Perfectionist podcast, you can send a message via the perfectionist.org website or just simply write a comment below. All the details about the websites are listed in the video below. Thank you for listening. Until the next episode, keep growing to become a healthy perfectionist, and for this, wish you well to remember, done is better than perfect.